Anyone who said a year ago that Reform will win the 2029 general election with a majority was considered a delusional idiot. But now the polling coming out actually suggests that's a pretty likely scenario. In fact, we've got another poll out which puts Reform on a whopping 32%. This is a Find Out Now poll that's just come out, and that is double the percentage of people who are considering voting Conservatives. Only 16% considering voting Conservative, well ahead of the Labour Party on only 21% as well. And the reason why them passing that 30% mark is so crucial is that you find in a first past the post system that when you get past 30%, that is when you are in a position to have a really, really strong chance of not just winning and being the biggest party, but having a majority, an outright majority in the House of Commons. I mean, this is just crazy how far the Reform Party has come in just 1 year. And I want to show you the 3-week average graph as well. And you can very clearly see the trend there. Reform absolutely skyrocketing upwards, whilst Labour and the Conservatives dwindle down and lose support. You can see a little bit of a boost in support for the Lib Dem and the Greens as well, but it's fairly minor. And I want to show you what the CEO of Electoral Calculus said on GB News when he broke this down, because it's really interesting how we've got to this situation. Where are the voters coming from who are all switching to Reform?
Of Reform UK now looking simply unstoppable. Well, according to a new poll out today, Farage's party is now on 32% of voting intentions, 11 points ahead of the governing Labour Party and a whopping 16% ahead of the Conservatives. Now I'm joined now by Martin Baxter. He's the founder and the CEO of Electoral Calculus. Martin, always a pleasure. The polling direction seems to be going in that momentum phase consistently. Reform are looking like they are ahead. You've got some fascinating information for us. We talked about where the Labour vote is going. And are the Labour Party correct to be tacking towards the right? You've got a graphic for us on the screen there, Martin. Talk us through it.
This is really interesting,
thanks,
this
Mark.
graphic.
So, as you say, Reform are on the up and up. We've got this new poll today with them on 32%, but even on a poll of polls, which takes an average, they're on 30%. And 30% is a magic number for any party that pretty much guarantees you get a majority if there was an election at Westminster tomorrow. But
did you hear that? That's pretty shocking, right?
See...
So it's pretty shocking to hear, not just me, but the CEO of Electoral Calculus, who is the absolute expert at taking polls and figuring out how they are going to translate into seats, saying there that when you get past that 30% mark, you are pretty much guaranteed a majority. And you heard there, it's not just this poll, because I know we get some polls that are a little bit wacky, but the poll of polls is getting them over that 30% mark as well. That is huge news for the Reform Party. Now take a listen to the explanation of this graphic and where the voters are all moving around from.
Where voters are actually moving from and to. So the graphic here is not a 19th century plan of the Battle of Waterloo. It's actually the Battle of Westminster that's going on right now. So each little person there represents 1% of the voting public. So there's 100 of those coloured people, and you can see them moving around. So Labour at the last election had a big block, but you can see all that grey set of people that they're greyed out. They've left Labour and they've gone elsewhere. And the worrying thing for Labour is they've gone in lots of different directions. A couple have gone to the Lib Dems and the Greens, keeping with the centre-left. 3 have moved over to Reform directly, but not a huge number. But 6% of the entire population were Labour voters who are now planning to be non-voters. They're planning to stay at home if there was an election tomorrow. So Labour's problem being that they're picking up the Conservatives' problem from last year, which is that they could best be described as wide-spectrum repulsive. They are throwing off voters in all directions. Reform are gathering in voters from many directions, from the Liberals, from Labour, from the Conservatives, and also a large number of people who didn't vote at the last election would like to vote for Reform. So that's the very interesting tectonics underneath the headlines that we're seeing. But it reflects the fact there's big movements in British politics.
It's a fascinating phrase, wide spectrum repulsive. I think I've seen them. Well, they're a punk band or something. I digress. But this points to a big problem because the Labour vote is fracturing towards the left, right and centre, literally, and a big problem, ennui. people sitting at home. They don't recognise the party anymore, or they simply think it's moving in the wrong direction. And that means, Martin Baxter, if the Labour Party are trying to out-reform reform, it might put people off who are going to the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, and that, as you call, is wide spectrum repulsive and very difficult to fix. Martin Baxter, we ran out of time, but thank you very much for joining us on the show. Always a pleasure to have your expertise.
So really interesting stuff there, because initially Reform were mostly picking up their votes from people defecting from the Conservatives. But now people seem to be coming from all over the place, as clearly was evident in the local elections and the Runcorn by-election, where a seat that was a super safe Labour seat flipped to Reform. So clearly a lot of Labour voters flipped to the Reform Party. So it's not just the case that people on the right of politics are flipping to the Reform Party. Now, this leaves both the Reform Party and the Labour Party in a difficult position in terms of how do they go about their strategy, their policies, what sort of messages they put out in campaigns when it comes to a general election in 2029, because they don't really know who they're aiming for, right? I mean, there was talk a few months ago when it wasn't really clear who's going to be the main contender against the Labour Party, Reform or Conservatives, whether Labour should be focusing on attacking Reform or attacking the Tories. We had a source from Number 10 admit to GB News that they were thinking in Number 10 that it's a 50-50 chance who it's going to be, so they had no idea who to go on the attack for. Now I think it's looking quite clear that Reform are going to be the main opposition in that sense, but on the one hand, they need to be trying to stop people from leaving the Labour Party and voting for Reform, but they also need to somehow, with the same messaging, try and stop people leaving to the Lib Dems, to the Greens, etc. And I think when you had that Keir Starmer Island of Strangers speech on immigration, it was very clear how difficult their task is to try and win voters back. Because yes, what Keir Starmer said, it was clearly trying to get back people who had switched to the Reform Party, but then at the same time it massively pissed off people on the left of the party. And there will be people who watched that Island of Strangers speech and thought, you know, Keir Starmer is the new Enoch Powell, as they were saying. I'm going to vote for a different party. I'm going to vote for the Lib Dems or the Greens instead, who are maybe more kinder about immigration. And so it's a very difficult position. And then same for the Reform Party, right? What is their messaging going to be? Are they going to try and move more to the centre to pick up more voters from the Labour Party, seeing as there clearly are people from all different parties, Labour, Lib Dems and everything, moving towards Reform? Or do they stick to their guns and they stay more on the right and have a really harsh stance on immigration? You know, I'm sorry, but, you know, if you step in this country illegally, you're deported straight away? Or should they have a more a policy that will appeal more to people who perhaps have a little bit recognise that immigration is a big problem, but have a little bit more of a sympathetic approach? It's very difficult for both parties, but what is clear is that Reform are the party with momentum here. It is genuinely insane what they have achieved and how much they have grown the party and the support for it in just 1 year. Okay, to think, you know, this time last year, Nigel Farage just took over the party and they managed to, at that general election, pull off 5 seats. And we thought that was insane that they got 5 seats. But now we're looking at them potentially getting, you know, I think there was one poll suggested they might even get 380 seats if there were a general election tomorrow. It's crazy, genuinely crazy. So anyway, that is the latest on the polling. I'm Chloe Dobbs. Thank you very much for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe to Reasoned if you're not already so you don't miss out on any more updates.